Hi, everyone. I'm Siriana, and I'm here with my colleagues Eloy and Sarah, and we're really honored today to be joined by Candace Allen. It's so wonderful to have you back on campus. We know you're returning to Harvard, and we'd love it if you could introduce yourself for us in the audience.
I'm in the class of 71. I was born in Boston and grew up in Stamford, Connecticut. And my mother, who also was born and raised in Boston, went to BU, and her sister, 11 years junior, went to Wellesley. But I always kind of thought that Radcliffe was where I would be going. I, for the better part of 50 years, had nothing to do with Harvard. I came back briefly, and I guess I should go back. I went into the film industry, and I'm a writer now, but I lived in New York and Los Angeles and Berlin, then back to Los Angeles, and I've been in London for 29 years. And my life has really been in the arts and exterior of academia and so forth. And I had mixed feelings about Harvard. I mean, one of the things about coming back here is that the buildings look like they've been all cleaned with toothbrushes. It was so much dirtier in the late 60s and early 70s. It was much sootier. Everything was more sooty, more soot down at the heels, kind of like, the South Bronx or the East Village. That feeling was also on this campus. But now everything's clipped and clean. All the mortar is just lovely ivory color, and it's wonderful. And there's the Disneyland of, marketing and swag. My major was more political activity than anything else. And then in my senior year, I decided some of the best libraries in the world are right here, and maybe I ought to use them. But it was a very febrile time, and most of us, at that point, Radcliffe had 1,200 students, and we, the women, applied to Radcliffe. And I'm not exactly sure. The joint classes had happened, so maybe 20 years before, but the Harvard diploma was fairly recent, maybe the beginning of the 60s. But all of us were on the quad. And there had been a kind of unstated quota of 5 black women, black girls, a year. And then in our year, they took 15. And we came from lots of different places. I think the concentration was mostly from the East, but there were some from the South. I don't know if anybody was from the Midwest. In the next class there was. But we immediately, some people have been very politically involved, but we immediately, there were 2. There's myself and Elizabeth Wamboy Seton in Comstock. There was Lonnie Guinier, who became a law professor, and Suzanne Lynn, of whom I spoke, in Holmes. We were scattered. We were completely, evenly distributed throughout. I was a desegregator, so I was used to being around white people. We found one another and stuck together. And at that point, for those years, the Afro, the political and social, and that was the center of our world. And all of it had been mildly trying to push for the department very politely and so forth. There were a few Radcliffe women who were involved in it, but the guys they were more numerous. It was about 25 or 30 per class. Some people got lost and did their own things, but basically folks were a part of it. And then in two things happened in April of '68, which was on spring break, Dr. King was assassinated. And although we had a lot of political meetings, and in Stanford, I knew about Malcolm X and so forth. We come back in April of '68, and we have a march, a silent march through the yard. And it's interesting. No white students joined it. They kind of just watched us. And at that point, we got much more serious about starting the push for the department. A couple of weeks later, we found out that Radcliffe had admitted 12 black students instead of 15. And so the first active political demonstration was, and I don't know if you've seen the 1969 yearbook, the Harvard yearbook, but his last name is Lee, and I just did an email exchange with him, but I can't remember his first name. That happens. That'll happen to you. But he did a whole photo essay that was part of the yearbook for '69, which was about Black life on campus. And one of the things was photographs of us taking over then Mary Bunting's office. The entire day, and we were silent. And then, some of the guys came and leaned against the windows and so forth as she finally, because they didn't know what to do with us. I mean, here we are. We wouldn't leave. We sat there. I mean, a lot of people had been involved in various political activities in their childhoods and so forth. Partying was very important. Partying, dancing, it was very, very important. And by again, I can't remember if it was sophomore year or junior year, Radcliffe used to have resident couples in the dorms that were kind of the locus parentis. And there was, for the first time, there was a black couple. And Cheryl, the wife, was pregnant, and she was a former dancer, and it's like, what am I going to do with myself? And she started an African dance group. And because there's no Kuumba singers. There's nothing. Yeah. There's nothing here. At the end of '68, of the '67, '68 year and the beginning of '68, '69, many of the faculty position was that there's not enough about black people to know, to study, to warrant a Harvard department. The one black full professor was Africanist named Martin Kilson, and he hated us. He would have nothing to do with us. He was, at the forefront of opposition. Meanwhile, the other feature of Radcliffe life is that since there's pretty much no interracial dating, there was a huge rally in the stadium, Soldiers Field. And we're dancing and so forth. And there were people who were calling us pickaninnies and jigaboos from the Harvard group, white students and so forth. And during the time we were doing agitprop stuff and so forth. And the faculty was finally going to have to, there had been months of meetings. We had a student committee. I was not on that committee. Was part of the meetings that devised the position papers, but there were about 7. I was not one of them, but they met with a faculty committee. And then finally it was going up to a faculty vote. And that summer, many of us got jobs doing things for the department. My job was to compile a bibliography to be the basis of the department library. And when I came in 2005 to do a reading for with my novel Veleda. Werner Zolas told me that that was still the basis, was still considered the basis for the library in Hutchins, which of course made me feel good.
Yeah. I have a question about that actually. So, do you think that your bibliography making, did it come all from the summer, or were your classes from previous years able to be? It sounds like maybe they weren't able to be consulted.
God, no. We didn't really have classes on Black anything until 69, 70. And then there was a Black poetry class, and there was politics, different political things. That's when that started. There was nothing. There was nothing. Music department, ethnomusicology. Kilson was doing a couple of African history and politics courses. Got Ephraim Isaacs, who came in and did African history. All of that started in the 69, 70 year. And then at the end of 1970, one of the other things that's happening with Radcliffe is that many of us are continuing to dance. And I was also some of us were going to Dorchester to the Elma Lewis School on Monday evenings to do more advanced classes, but particularly on Monday evenings, the Ghanaian drummer Olatunji would come up from New York, and he would lead a drumming class, and we would be doing our dance classes to that, which was just amazing. So we have that communal thing that's going on. But you have Kent State and you have Jackson State. And the other thing, as I backtrack, is that the sisters were always more ready to go in and fight than the brothers. So senior year, the easier battles are won. We've got more students. The department has been, there's a timeline for the department that's happening. But then we try to look at labor. And of course, you're dealing with unions and nothing's happening.
All of your stories about the climate of Harvard in this period, it's like right before Radcliffe integrates in 1975, makes me think of just how many times Black women in particular are put at the front of a movement, and of Eileen Southern, who,
Yes.
She herself was put in charge of the AAAS department. She was the second chair.
Yes.
And she faced a lot of backlash from the community. She went through a lot of trials and tribulations. And I'm just wondering, when was the first time you ever encountered her work or knew of her, and what was that experience like for you?
I actually, when I got out, I'm dealing with film, and music was very important to me, but film was my thing. And in the screenplays that I wrote that did not get produced, involved dance and jazz and so on. One of my dad's best friends was Miles Davis, and his sister, my aunt's second husband, was a guy named Luther Henderson, who came out of Juilliard to work with Duke Ellington. And I was aware of Eileen Southern. And I vaguely heard that it had been hard, but I'm like so non-Harvard. Right. I'm in the arts. I'm in Europe. I'm just not involved. And when I'm talking to the few friends that I have, that's not what we're talking about. So I was vaguely aware that she was the head of the department after Lonnie's dad, Ewart. But Soul Music was published in 2012. And in 2013, the South Bank Center, which I know I'm very connected with them in London, and they're doing a festival based on Alice Ross's "The Rest Is Noise," which I had read and thought was wonderful, and so forth. And they say to me, "We'd like you to do a panel on African American symphonic music, and I'm like, oh, okay. I knew nothing. And so I went on Abe Books. I'd known about this book. I'd heard about it because I always do a lot of research. I knew about the book. I didn't get the most recent version because I didn't need the most recent version for the earlier history. And I devoured it amazed, regurgitated it. It was imprinted on me. It has been such a tool, and also in the creation of Cheneke, to help people understand why there was this reservoir of Black classical musicians that we could draw on even in 2015, whereas there weren't here, because I had learned about, the German music teachers and the Moravians and the string groups. But Eileen was a champion, and hopefully she will get up there in the pantheon like Florence Price, who's now like in a stained glass window.
Yes.
And that's good.
Yes. Yeah.
But there should also be a stained glass window for Eileen Southern.
Yeah.
And as bad as it was for Florence Price and being ignored, she wasn't ground in by aggressive adversarial stuff, which is more, you're dealing more with kind of Shirley Chisholm stuff, but with Eileen Southern, but their personalities are very different. He's a musician and an academic as opposed to a political animal with a wig hat who's just like, come on. Yeah. You don't scare me.
Yeah.